DH Audio presents Agatha Christie's The Cretan Ball, read by Daniel Massey.
Hercule Poirot looked thoughtfully at his visitor. He saw a pale face with a determined-looking chin, eyes that were more grey than blue, and hair that was of that real blue-black shade so seldom seen, the hyacinthine locks of ancient Greece. He noted the well-cut but also well-worn country tweeds, the shabby handbag, and the unconscious arrogance of manner that lay behind the girl's obvious nervousness. He thought to himself, "Ah, yes, she is the county, but no money, and it must be something quite out of the way that would bring her to me." Diana Mabley said, and her voice shook a little, I don't know whether you can help me or not, Monsieur Poirot. It's a very extraordinary position." Poirot said, "But yes, tell me." Diana Mabley said, "I've come to you because I don't know what to do. I don't even know if there is anything to do." "Will you let me be the judge of that?" The colour surged suddenly into the girl's face. She said, rapidly and breathlessly, "I've come to you because the man I've been engaged to for over a year has broken off our engagement." She stopped and eyed him defiantly. "You must think," she said, "that I'm completely mental." Slowly, Hercule Poirot shook his head. "On the contrary, mademoiselle, I have no doubt whatever but that you are extremely intelligent. It is certainly not my métier in life to patch up the lovers' quarrels, and I know very well that you are quite aware of that. It is therefore that there is something unusual about the breaking of this engagement. That is so, is it not?" The girl nodded. She said in a clear, precise voice, "Hugh broke off our engagement because he thinks he is going mad. He thinks people who are mad should not marry." Hercule Poirot's eyebrows rose a little. "And do you not agree?" "I don't know. What is being mad, after all? Everyone is a little mad." "It has been said so." Poirot agreed cautiously. "It's only when you begin thinking you're a poached egg or something that they have to shut you up." "And your fiancé has not reached that stage?" Diana Mabley said, "I can't see that there's anything wrong with Hugh at all. He's the sanest person I know. Sound, dependable. Then why does he think he is going mad?" Poirot paused a moment before going on. "Is there, perhaps, madness in his family?" Reluctantly, Diana jerked her head in assent. She said, "His grandfather was mental, I believe, and some great-aunt or other. But what I say is that every family has got someone queer in it, you know, a bit half-witted or extra clever or something." Her eyes were appealing. Hercule Poirot shook his head sadly. He said, "I am very sorry for you, mademoiselle." Her chin shot out. She cried, "I don't want you to be sorry for me. I want you to do something." "What do you want me to do?" "I don't know, but there's something wrong." "Will you tell me, mademoiselle, all about your fiancé?" Diana spoke rapidly. "His name's Hugh Chandler. He's 24. His father is Admiral Chandler. They live at Lyde Manor. It's been in the Chandler family since the time of Elizabeth. Hugh's the only son. He went into the Navy. All the Chandlers are sailors. It's a sort of tradition. Ever since Sir Gilbert Chandler sailed with Sir Walter Raleigh in 15-something or other. Hugh went into the Navy as a matter of course. His father wouldn't have heard of anything else. And yet it was his father who insisted on getting him out of it." "When was that?" "Nearly a year ago, quite suddenly." "Was Hugh Chandler happy in his profession?" "Absolutely." "There was no scandal of any kind?" "About Hugh? Absolutely nothing. He was getting on splendidly. He couldn't understand his father." "What reason did Admiral Chandler himself give?" Diana said slowly, "He never really gave a reason. Oh, he said it was necessary Hugh should learn to manage the estate, but that was only a pretext. Even George Frobisher realized that." "Who is Georges Frobisher?" "Colonel Frobisher. He's Admiral Chandler's oldest friend and Hugh's godfather. He spends most of his time down at the manor." "And what did Colonel Frobisher think of Admiral Chandler's determination that his son should leave the Navy?" "He was dumbfounded. He couldn't understand it at all. Nobody could." "Not even Hugh Chandler himself?" Diana did not answer at once. Poirot waited a minute, then he went on. "At the time, perhaps he too was astonished. But now, has he said nothing? Nothing at all?" Diana murmured reluctantly. "He said about a week ago, that his father was right, that it was the only thing to be done. Did you ask him why? Of course. But he wouldn't tell me. Hercule Poirot reflected for a minute or two. Then he said, "Have there been any unusual occurrences in your part of the world, starting perhaps about a year ago? Something that has given rise to a lot of local talk and surmise?" She flashed out, "I don't know what you mean." Poirot said quietly, but with authority in his voice, "You had better tell me." "There wasn't anything, nothing of the kind you mean." "Of what kind, then?" "I think you're simply odious. Queer things often happen on farms. It's Revenge or the village idiot or somebody." "What happened?" She said reluctantly, "There was a fuss about some sheep. Their throats were cut. Oh, it was horrid. But they all belonged to one farmer, and he's a very hard man. The police thought it was some kind of spite against him. But they didn't catch the person who had done it?" "No." She added fiercely, "But if you think—" Poirot held up his hand. He said, "You do not know in the least what I think. Tell me this. Has your fiancé consulted a doctor?" "No, I'm sure he hasn't." "Wouldn't that be the simplest thing for him to do?" Diana said slowly, "He won't. He hates doctors." "And his father?" "I don't think the Admiral believes much in doctors either. Says there are a lot of humbug merchants." "How does the Admiral seem himself? Is he well, happy?" Diana said in a low voice, "He's aged terribly in the last year?" "Yes. He's a wreck, a sort of shadow of what he used to be." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Then he said, "Did he approve of his son's engagement?" "Oh, yes. You see, my people's land joins his. We've been there for generations. He was frightfully pleased when you and I fixed it up." "And now, what does he say to your engagement being broken off?" The girl's voice shook a little. She said, "I met him yesterday morning. He was looking ghastly. He took my hand in both of his. He said, 'It's hard on you, my girl, but the boy's doing the right thing, the only thing he can do.'" "And so," said Hercule Poirot, "you came to me?" She nodded. She asked, "Can you do anything?" Hercule Poirot replied, "I do not know, but I can at least come down and see for myself." It was Hugh Chandler's magnificent physique that impressed Hercule Poirot more than anything else. Tall, magnificently proportioned, with a terrific chest and shoulders and a tawny head of hair. There was a tremendous air of strength and virility about him. On their arrival at Diana's house, she had at once rung up Admiral Chandler, and they had forthwith gone over to Lyde Manor, where they had found tea waiting on the long terrace. And with the tea, 3 men. There was Admiral Chandler, white-haired, looking older than his years, his shoulders bowed as though by an over-heavy burden, and his eyes dark and brooding. A contrast to him was his friend Colonel Frobisher, a dried-up, tough little man with reddish hair turning grey at the temples, a restless, irascible, snappy little man, rather like a terrier, but the possessor of a pair of extremely shrewd eyes. He had a habit of drawing down his brows over his eyes and lowering his head, thrusting it forward, whilst those same shrewd little eyes studied you piercingly. The third man was Hugh. "Fine specimen, eh?" said Colonel Frobisher. He spoke in a low voice, having noted Poirot's close scrutiny of the young man. Hercule Poirot nodded his head. He and Frobisher were sitting close together. The other 3 had their chairs on the far side of the tea-table and were chatting together in an animated but slightly artificial manner. Poirot murmured, "Yes, he's magnificent, magnificent. He's the young bull, yes, one might say, the bull dedicated to Poseidon, a perfect specimen of healthy manhood." "Looks fit enough, doesn't he?" Frobisher sighed. His shrewd little eyes stole sideways, considering Hercule Poirot. Presently he said, "I know who you are, you know." "Ah, that it is no secret." Poirot waved a royal hand. He was not incognito, the gesture seemed to say. He was travelling as himself. After a minute or two, Frobisher asked, "Did the girl get you down over this business?" "The business?" "The business of young Hugh. Yes, I see you know all about it. But I can't quite see why she went to you. Shouldn't have thought this sort of thing was in your line. I mean, say it's more a medical show." All kinds of things are in my line. You would be surprised. I mean, I can't quite see what she expected you could do. Miss Mebberley, said Poirot, is a fighter. Colonel Frobisher nodded a warm assent. Yes, she's a fighter, all right. She's a fine kid. She won't give up. All the same, you know, there are some things that you can't fight. His face looked suddenly old and tired. Poirot dropped his voice still lower. He murmured discreetly, "There is insanity, I understand, in the family?" Frobisher nodded. "Only crops up now and again," he murmured. "Skips a generation or two. Hugh's grandfather was the last." Poirot threw a quick glance in the direction of the other three. Diana was holding the conversation well, laughing and bantering Hugh. You would have said that the three of them had not a care in the world. "What form did the madness take?" Poirot asked softly. "The old boy became pretty violent in the end. He was perfectly all right up to 30, normal as could be. And then he began to go a bit queer. It was some time before people noticed it. And then a lot of rumours began going around. People started talking properly. Things happened that were hushed up, but, he raised his shoulders, ended up as mad as a hatter, poor devil. Homicidal, had to be certified." He paused for a moment and then added, "He lived to be quite an old man, I believe. And that's what Hugh is afraid of course. That's why he doesn't want to see a doctor. He's afraid of being shut up and living shut up for years. Can't say I blame him. I'd feel the same." "And Admiral Chandler, how does he feel?" "It's broken him up completely." Frobisher spoke shortly. "He is very fond of his son?" "Wrapped up in the boy. You see, his wife was drowned in a boating accident when the boy was only 10 years old. Since then he's lived for nothing but the child." "Was he very devoted to his wife?" "Worshipped her. Everybody worshipped her. She was one of the loveliest women I've ever known." He paused a moment and then said jerkily, "Care to see our portrait?" "I should like to see it very much." Frobisher pushed back his chair and rose. Aloud he said, "Going to show Monsieur Poirot one or two things, Charles. He's a bit of a connoisseur." The Admiral raised a vague hand. Frobisher tramped along the terrace, and Poirot followed him. For a moment Diana's face dropped its mask of gaiety and looked an agonized question. Hugh, too, raised his head and looked steadily at the small man with the big black moustache. Poirot followed Frobisher into the house. It was so dim at first, coming in out of the sunlight, that he could hardly distinguish one article from another, but he realized that the house was full of old and beautiful things. Colonel Frobisher led the way to the picture gallery. On the panelled walls hung portraits of dead and gone Chandlers, faces stern and gay, men in court dress or in naval uniform, women in satin and pearls. Finally Frobisher stopped under a portrait at the end of the gallery. "Painted by Orpen," he said gruffly. They stood looking up at a tall woman, her hand on a greyhound's collar, a woman with auburn hair and an expression of radiant vitality. "Boy's the spitting image of her," said Frobisher. "Don't you think so?" "In some things, yes." "He hasn't got her delicacy, her femininity, of course. He's a masculine edition, but in all the essential things—" He broke off. "Pity he inherited from the Chandlers the one thing he could well have done without." They were silent. There was melancholy in the air all around them, as though dead and gone Chandlers sighed for the taint that lay in their blood and which, remorselessly, from time to time, they passed on. Hercule Poirot turned his head to look at his companion. George Frobisher was still gazing up at the beautiful woman on the wall above him, and Poirot said softly, "You knew her well?" Frobisher spoke jerkily. "We were boy and girl together. I went off as a subaltern to India when she was 16. When I got back, she was married to Charles Chandler." "You knew him well, also?" "Charles is one of my oldest friends. He's my best friend. Always has been." "Did you see much of them after the marriage?" "Used to spend most of my leaves here. Like a second home to me, this place. Charles and Caroline always kept my room here, ready and waiting." He squared his shoulders, suddenly thrust his head forward pugnaciously. "That's why I'm here now, to stand by in case I'm wanted. If Charles needs me, I'm here." Again the shadow of tragedy crept over them. "And what do you think about all this?" Poirot asked. Frobisher stood stiffly. His brows came down over his eyes. "What I think is, the least said, the better. And to be frank, I don't see what you're doing in the business, Monsieur Poirot. I don't see why Diana roped you in and got you down here." "You are aware that Diana Mebberley's engagement to Hugh Chandler has been broken off?" "Yes, I know that." "And you know the reason for it?" Frobisher replied stiffly, "I don't do anything about that. Young people manage these things between them. Not my business to butt in." Poirot said, "Hugh Chandler told Diana that it was not right that they should marry because he was going out of his mind." He saw the beads of perspiration break out on Frobisher's forehead. He said, "Have we got to talk about the damn thing? What do you think you can do? Hugh's done the right thing, poor devil. It's not his fault. It's heredity, germplasm, brain cells. But once he knew, well, what else could he do but break the engagement? It's one of those things that just has to be done. If I could be convinced of that, you can take it from me." "But you have told me nothing." "I tell you I don't want to talk about it." "Why did Admiral Chandler force his son to leave the Navy?" "Because it was the only thing to be done." "Why?" Frobisher shook an obstinate head. Poirot murmured softly, "Was it to do with some sheep being killed?" The other man said angrily, "So you've heard about that?" "Diana told me." "That girl had far better keep her mouth shut." "She did not think it was conclusive." "She doesn't know." "What doesn't she know?" Unwillingly, jerkily, angrily, Frobisher spoke. "Oh, well, if you must have it. Chandler heard a noise that night. Thought it might be someone got in the house. Went out to investigate. Light in the boy's room. Chandler went in. Hugh asleep on bed. Dead asleep in his clothes. Blood on the clothes. Basin in the room full of blood. His father couldn't wake him. Next morning heard about sheep being found with their throats cut. Questioned Hugh. Boy didn't know anything about it. Didn't remember going out. And his shoes found by the side door caked in mud. Couldn't explain the blood in the basin. Couldn't explain anything. Poor devil didn't know. You understand? Charles came to me, talked it over. What was the best thing to be done? But then it happened again, 3 nights later. After that, well, you can see for yourself. The boy had got to leave the service. If he was here under Charles's eye, Charles could watch over him. Couldn't afford to have a scandal in the Navy. Yes, it was the only thing to be done." Poirot asked, "And since then?" Frobisher said fiercely, "I'm not answering any more questions. Don't you think Hugh knows his own business best?" Hercule Poirot did not answer. He was always loath to admit that anyone could know better than Hercule Poirot. As they came into the hall, they met Admiral Chandler coming in. He stood for a moment, a dark figure silhouetted against the bright light outside. He said in a low, gruff voice, "Oh, there you both are. Monsieur Poirot, I would like a word with you. Come into my study." Frobisher went out through the open door, and Poirot followed the Admiral. He had rather the feeling of having been summoned to the quarter-deck to give an account of himself. The Admiral motioned Poirot to take one of the big easy chairs, and himself sat down in the other. Poirot, whilst with Frobisher, had been impressed by the other's restlessness, nervousness, and irritability, all the signs of intense mental strain. With Admiral Chandler he felt a sense of hopelessness, of quiet, deep despair. With a deep sigh, Chandler said, "I can't help being sorry Diana has brought you into this. Poor child, I know how hard it is for her. But, well, it is our own private tragedy, and I think you will understand, Monsieur Poirot, that we don't want outsiders." "I can understand your feelings, certainly." "Diana, poor child, can't believe it. I couldn't at first. Probably wouldn't believe it now if I didn't know." He paused. "Know what?" "That it's in the blood. The taint, I mean." "And yet you agreed to the engagement?" Admiral Chandler flushed. "You mean I should have put my foot down then? But at the time I'd no idea. Hugh takes after his mother. Nothing about him to remind you of the Chandlers. I hoped he'd taken after her in every way. From his childhood upwards there's never been a trace of abnormality about him until now. I couldn't know that. Dash it all, there's a trace of insanity in nearly every old family." Poirot said softly, "You have not consulted a doctor?" Chandler roared, "No, and I'm not going to. The boy's safe enough here with me to look after him. They shan't shut him up between four walls like a wild beast. He is safe here, you say, but are others safe? What do you mean by that? Poirot did not reply. He looked steadily into Admiral Chandler's sad, dark eyes. The Admiral said bitterly, "Each man to his trade. You're looking for a criminal. My boy's not a criminal, Monsieur Poirot." "Not yet." "What do you mean by not yet?" "These things increase. Those sheep." "Who told you about the sheep?" "Diana Mebberley, and also your friend Colonel Frobisher." "George would have done better to keep his mouth shut." "He is a very old friend of yours, is he not?" "My best friend," the Admiral said gruffly. "And he was a friend of your wife's, too?" Chandler smiled. "Yes. George was in love with Caroline, I believe, when she was very young. He's never married. I believe that's the reason. Ah, well, I was the lucky one. Or so I thought. I carried her off, only to lose her." He sighed and his shoulders sagged. Poirot said, "Colonel Frobisher was with you when your wife was drowned?" Chandler nodded. "Yes. He was with us down in Cornwall when it happened. She and I were out in the boat together. He happened to stay at home that day. I've never understood how that boat came to capsize. Must have sprung a sudden leak. We were right out in the bay, strong tide running. I held her up as long as I could." His voice broke. "Her body was washed up 2 days later. Thank the Lord we hadn't taken little Hugh out with us. At least, that's what I thought at the time. Now, well, better for Hugh, poor devil, perhaps, if he had been with us. If it had all been finished and done for then." Again there came that deep, hopeless sigh. "We're the last of the Chandlers, Monsieur Poirot. There will be no more Chandlers at Lyde after we're gone. When Hugh got engaged to Diana, I hoped... Well, it's no good talking of that. Thank God they didn't marry. That's all I can say." Hercule Poirot sat on a seat in the rose garden. Beside him sat Hugh Chandler. Diana Mebberley had just left them. The young man turned a handsome, tortured face towards his companion. He said, "You've got to make her understand, Monsieur Poirot." He paused for a minute and then went on. "You see, Di's a fighter. She won't give in. She won't accept what she's darn well got to accept. She will go on believing that I'm sane. While you yourself are quite certain that you are, pardon me, insane?" The young man winced. He said, "I'm not actually hopelessly off my head yet, but it's getting worse. Diana doesn't know. Bless her, she's only seen me when I am all right. And when you are all wrong, what happens?" Hugh Chandler took a long breath. Then he said, "For one thing, I dream. And when I dream, I am mad. Last night, for instance, I wasn't a man any longer. I was first of all a bull, a mad bull, racing about in blazing sunlight, tasting dust and blood in my mouth, dust and blood. And then I was a dog, a great slavering dog. I had hydrophobia. Children scattered and fled as I came. Men tried to shoot me. Someone set down a great bowl of water for me, and I couldn't drink. I couldn't drink." He paused. "I woke up, and I knew it was true. I went over to the washstand. My mouth was parched, horribly parched and dry. I was thirsty, but I couldn't drink, Monsieur Poirot. I couldn't swallow. Oh, my God, I wasn't able to drink." Hercule Poirot made a gentle murmur. Hugh Chandler went on. His hands were clenched on his knees. His face was thrust forward. His eyes were half closed, as though he saw something coming towards him. "And there are things that aren't dreams, things that I see when I'm wide awake, spectres, frightful shapes. They leer at me. And sometimes I'm able to fly, to leave my bed and fly through the air, to ride the winds. And fiends bear me company. There isn't any doubt. It's in my blood. It's my family heritage. I can't escape. Thank God I found it out in time, before I'd married Diana. Suppose we'd had a child and handed on this frightful thing to him." He laid a hand on Poirot's arm. "You must make her understand. You must tell her. She's got to forget. She's got to." There will be someone else, someday. There's young Steve Graham. He's crazy about her, and he's an awfully good chap. She'd be happy with him, and safe. I want her to be happy. Graham's hard up, of course, and so are her people, but when I'm gone, they'll be all right. Hercule's voice interrupted him. Why will they be all right when you are gone? Hugh Chandler smiled. It was a gentle, lovable smile. He said, There's my mother's money. She was an heiress, you know. It came to me. I've left it all to Diana. Hercule Poirot sat back in his chair. He said, Ah! Then he said, But you may live to be quite an old man, Mr. Chandler. Hugh Chandler shook his head. He said sharply, No, Monsieur Poirot. I am not going to live to be an old man. Then he drew back with a sudden shudder. My God, look! He stared over Poirot's shoulder. There! Standing by you! It's a skeleton, its bones are shaking. It's calling to me, beckoning. His eyes, the pupils widely dilated, stared into the sunshine. He leaned suddenly sideways as though collapsing. Then, turning to Poirot, he said in an almost childlike voice, You didn't see anything? Slowly, Hercule Poirot shook his head. Hugh Chandler said hoarsely, I don't mind this so much, seeing things. It's the blood I'm frightened of. The blood in my room, on my clothes. We had a parrot. One morning it was there, in my room, with its throat cut. And I was lying on the bed with the razor in my hand, wet with its blood. He leant closer to Poirot. Even just lately things have been killed, he whispered. All around, in the village, out on the downs. Sheep, young lambs, a collie dog. Father locks me in at night, but sometimes the doors open in the morning. I must have a key hidden somewhere, but I don't know where I've hidden it. I don't know. It isn't I who do these things. It's someone else who comes into me, who takes possession of me, who turns me from a man into a raving monster who wants blood and who can't drink water. Suddenly he buried his face in his hands. After a minute or two, Poirot asked, I still do not understand why you have not seen a doctor. Hugh Chandler shook his head. He said, Don't you understand? Physically I'm strong. I'm as strong as a bull. I might live for years, shut up between four walls. That I can't face. It would be better to go out altogether. There are ways, you know. An accident, cleaning a gun, that sort of thing. Diana will understand. I'd rather take my own way out. He looked defiantly at Poirot, but Poirot did not respond to the challenge. Instead, he asked mildly, What do you eat and drink? Hugh Chandler flung his head back. He roared with laughter. Nightmares after indigestion? Is that your idea? Poirot merely repeated gently, What do you eat and drink? Just what everybody else eats and drinks. No special medicine, cachets, pills? Good Lord, no. Do you really think patent pills would cure my trouble? He quoted derisively, Canst thou then minister to a mind diseased? Hercule Poirot said dryly, I am trying to. Does anyone in this house suffer with eye trouble? Hugh Chandler stared at him. He said, Father's eyes give him a good deal of trouble. He has to go to an oculist fairly often. Ah, Poirot meditated for a moment or two. Then he said, Colonel Frobisher, I suppose, has spent much of his life in India? Yes, he was in the Indian Army. He's very keen on India. Talks about it a lot. Native traditions and all that. Poirot murmured, Ah, again. Then he remarked, I see that you have cut your chin. Hugh put his hand up. Yes, quite a nasty gash. Father startled me one day when I was shaving. I'm a bit nervy these days, you know. And I've had a bit of a rash over my chin and neck. It makes shaving difficult. Poirot said, You should use a soothing cream. Oh, I do. Uncle George gave me one. He gave a sudden laugh. We're talking like a woman's beauty parlour. Lotions, soothing creams, patent pills, eye trouble. What does it all amount to? What are you getting at, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot said quietly, I am trying to do the best I can for Diana Maberly. Hugh's mood changed. His face sobered. He laid a hand on Poirot's arm. Yes, do what you can for her. Tell her she's got to forget. Tell her that it is no good hoping. Tell her some of the things I've told you. Tell her... Oh, tell her, for God's sake, to keep away from me. That's the only thing she can do for me now. Keep away and try to forget. Have you courage, mademoiselle? Great courage. You will need it. Diana cried sharply. Then it's true? It's true? He is mad? Hercule Poirot said, I am not an alienist, mademoiselle. It is not I who can say, this man is mad, this man is sane. She came closer to him. Admiral Chandler thinks Hugh is mad. George Frobisher thinks he is mad. Hugh himself thinks he is mad. Poirot was watching her. And you, mademoiselle? I say he isn't mad. That's why... She stopped. That is why you came to me? Yes. I couldn't have had any other reason for coming to you, could I? That, said Hercule Poirot, is exactly what I have been asking myself, mademoiselle. I don't understand you. Who is Stephen Graham? She stared. Stephen Graham? Oh, he's just someone. She caught him by the arm. What's in your mind? What are you thinking about? You just stand there behind that great moustache of yours, blinking your eyes in the sunlight, and you don't tell me anything. You're making me afraid, horribly afraid. Why are you making me afraid? Perhaps, said Poirot, because I am afraid myself. The deep grey eyes opened wide, stared up at him. She said in a whisper, What are you afraid of? Hercule Poirot sighed, a deep sigh. He said, It is much easier to catch a murderer than it is to prevent a murder. She cried out, Murder? Don't use that word. Nevertheless, said Hercule Poirot, I do use it. He altered his tone, speaking quickly and authoritatively. Mademoiselle, it is necessary that both you and I should pass the night at Lyde Manor. I look to you to arrange the matter. You can do that? Yes, I suppose so. But why? Because there is no time to lose. You have told me that you have courage. Prove that courage now. Do what I ask and make no questions about it. She nodded without a word and turned away. Poirot followed her into the house after the lapse of a moment or two. He heard her voice in the library and the voices of 3 men. He passed up the broad staircase. There was no one on the upper floor. He found Hugh Chandler's room easily enough. In the corner of the room was a fitted wash-basin with hot and cold water. Over it, on a glass shelf, were various tubes and pots and bottles. Hercule Poirot went quickly and dexterously to work. What he had to do did not take him long. He was downstairs again in the hall when Diana came out of the library looking flushed and rebellious. "It's all right," she said. Admiral Chandler drew Poirot into the library and closed the door. He said, "Look here, Monsieur Poirot, I don't like this." "What don't you like, Admiral Chandler?" "Diana has been insisting that you and she should both spend the night here. I don't want to be inhospitable." "It is not a question of hospitality." "As I say, I don't like being inhospitable, but frankly I don't like it, Monsieur Poirot. I don't want it, and I don't understand the reason for it. What good can it possibly do?" "Shall we say that it is an experiment I am trying?" "What kind of an experiment?" "That, you will pardon me, is my business." "Now look here, Monsieur Poirot, I didn't ask you to come here in the first place." Poirot interrupted. "Believe me, Admiral Chandler, I quite understand and appreciate your point of view. I am here simply and solely because of the obstinacy of a girl in love. You have told me certain things. Colonel Frobisher has told me certain things. You himself has told me certain things. Now, I want to see for myself." "Yes, but see what? I tell you there's nothing to see. I lock you into his room every night, and that's that. And yet sometimes he tells me that the door is not locked in the morning." "What's that?" "Have you not found the door unlocked yourself?" Chandler was frowning. "I always imagined George had unlocked." "What do you mean?" "Where do you leave the key? In the lock?"
No, I lay it on the chest outside. I, or George, or Withers, the valet, take it from there in the morning. We've told Withers it's because Hugh walks in his sleep, I dare say. He knows more, but he's a faithful fellow, been with me for years.
Is there another key?
Not that I know of.
One could have been made.
But who?
Your son thinks that he himself has one hidden somewhere, although he is unaware of it in his waking state.
Colonel Frobisher, speaking from the far end of the room, said, "I don't like it, Charles. The girl—" Admiral Chandler said quickly, "Just what I was thinking. The girl mustn't come back with you. Come back yourself, if you like."
Poirot said, "Why don't you want Miss Mebberley here tonight?"
Frobisher said in a low voice, "It's too risky. In these cases—"
He stopped. Poirot said, "Hugh is devoted to her."
Chandler cried, "That's just why. Damn it, old man, everything is topsy-turvy where a madman's concerned. Hugh knows that himself. Diana mustn't come here."
"As to that," said Poirot, "Diana must decide for herself." He went out of the library. Diana was waiting outside in the car. She called out, "We'll get what we want for the night and be back in time for dinner." As they drove down the long drive, Poirot repeated to her the conversation he had just held with the Admiral and Colonel Frobisher. She laughed scornfully. "Do they think Hugh would hurt me?" By way of reply, Poirot asked her if she would mind stopping at the chemist's in the village. He had forgotten, he said, to pack a toothbrush. The chemist's shop was in the middle of the peaceful village street. Diana waited outside in the car. It struck her that Hercule Poirot was a long time choosing a toothbrush. In the big bedroom with the heavy Elizabethan oak furniture, Hercule Poirot sat and waited. There was nothing to do but wait. All his arrangements were made. It was towards early morning that the summons came. At the sound of footsteps outside, Poirot drew back the bolt and opened the door. There were two men in the passage outside, two middle-aged men who looked older than their years. The Admiral was stern-faced and grim. Colonel Frobisher twitched and trembled. Chandler said simply, "Will you come with us, Monsieur Poirot?" There was a huddled figure lying outside Diana Mabeley's bedroom door. The light fell on a rumpled, tawny head. Hugh Chandler lay there, breathing stertorously. He was in his dressing-gown and slippers. In his right hand was a sharply curved, shining knife. Not all of it was shining. Here and there it was obscured by red, glistening patches. Hercule Poirot exclaimed softly, "Mon Dieu!" Frobisher said sharply, "She's all right. He hasn't touched her." He raised his voice and called, "Diana! It's us! Let us in!" Poirot heard the Admiral groan and mutter under his breath, "My boy, my poor boy." There was a sound of bolts being drawn. The door opened, and Diana stood there. Her face was dead white. She faltered out, "What's happened? There was someone trying to get in. I heard them, feeling the door, the handle, scratching on the panels. Oh, it was awful, like an animal." Frobisher said sharply, "Thank God your door was locked." "Monsieur Poirot told me to lock it." Poirot said, "Lift him up and bring him inside." The two men stooped and raised the unconscious man. Diana caught her breath with a little gasp as they passed her. "Hugh! Is it Hugh? What's that? On his hands?" Hugh Chandler's hands were sticky and wet with a brownish-red stain. Diana breathed, "Is that blood?" Poirot looked inquiringly at the two men. The Admiral nodded. He said, "Not human. Thank God. A cat. I found it downstairs in the hall. Throat cut. Afterwards he must have come up here." "Here?" Diana's voice was low with horror. "To me?" The man on the chair stirred, muttered. They watched him, fascinated. Hugh Chandler sat up. He blinked. "Hello?" His voice was dazed, hoarse. "What's happened? Why am I—" He stopped. He was staring at the knife, which he held still clasped in his hand. He said in a slow, thick voice, "What have I done?" His eyes went from one to the other. They rested at last on Diana, shrinking back against the wall. He said quietly, "Did I attack Diana?" His father shook his head. Hugh said,
"Tell me what has happened. I've got to know." They told him unwillingly, haltingly. His quiet perseverance drew it out of them. Outside the window the sun was coming up. Hercule Poirot drew a curtain aside. The radiance of the dawn came into the room. Hugh Chandler's face was composed, his voice was steady. He said, "I see." Then he got up. He smiled and stretched himself. His voice was quite natural as he said, "Beautiful morning, what? Think I'll go out in the woods and try to get a rabbit." He went out of the room and left them staring after him. Then the Admiral started forward. Frobisher caught him by the arm. "No, Charles, no. It's the best way. For him, poor devil, if for nobody else." Diana had thrown herself sobbing on the bed. Admiral Chandler said, his voice coming unevenly, "You're right, George, you're right. I know. The boy's got guts." Frobisher said, and his voice, too, was broken, "He's a man." There was a moment's silence, and then Chandler said, "Damn it, where's that cursed foreigner?" In the gun-room, Hugh Chandler had lifted his gun from the rack and was in the act of loading it when Hercule Poirot's hand fell on his shoulder. Hercule Poirot's voice said one word, and said it with a strange authority. He said, "No." Hugh Chandler stared at him. He said in a thick, angry voice, "Take your hands off me! Don't interfere! There's going to be an accident, I tell you. It's the only way out." Again, Hercule Poirot repeated that one word, "No." "Don't you realize that if it hadn't been for the accident of her door being locked, I would have cut Diana's throat? Diana's, with that knife." "I realize nothing of the kind. You would not have killed Miss Mebberley." "I killed the cat, didn't I?" "No, you did not kill the cat. You did not kill the parrot. You did not kill the ship." Hugh stared at him. He demanded, "Are you mad, or am I?" Hercule Poirot replied, "Neither of us is mad." It was at that moment that Admiral Chandler and Colonel Frobisher came in. Behind them came Diana. Hugh Chandler said in a weak, dazed voice, "This chap says I'm not mad." Hercule Poirot said, "I am happy to tell you that you are entirely and completely sane." Hugh laughed. It was a laugh such as a lunatic might popularly be supposed to give. "Ha, ha, 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 ha! That's damn funny! It's sane, is it, to cut the throats of sheep and other animals? I was sane, was I, when I killed that parrot and the cat tonight? I tell you, you did not kill the sheep, or the parrot, or the cat." "Then who did?" "Someone who has had at heart the sole object of proving you insane. On each occasion, you were given a heavy soporific, and a blood-stained knife or razor was planted by you. It was someone else whose bloody hands were washed in your basin. But why? In order that you should do what you were just about to do when I stopped you." Hugh stared. Poirot turned to Colonel Frobisher. "Colonel Frobisher, you lived for many years in India. Did you never come across cases where persons were deliberately driven mad by the administration of drugs?" Colonel Frobisher's face lit up. He said, "Never came across a case myself, but I've heard of them often enough. Datura poisoning. It ends by driving a person insane." "Exactly. Well, the active principle of datura is very closely allied to, if it is not actually, the alkaloid atropine, which is also obtained from belladonna, or deadly nightshade. Belladonna preparations are fairly common, and atropine sulfate itself is prescribed freely for eye treatments. By duplicating a prescription and getting it made up in different places, a large quantity of the poison could be obtained without arousing suspicion. The alkaloid could be extracted from it and then introduced into, say, a soothing shaving cream. Applied externally, it would cause a rash. This would soon lead to abrasions in shaving, and thus the drug would be continually entering the system. It would produce certain symptoms: dryness of the mouth and throat, difficulty in swallowing, hallucinations, double vision, all the symptoms, in fact, which Mr. Chandler has experienced. He turned to the young man. And to remove the last doubt from your mind, I will tell you that that is not a supposition but a fact. Your shaving cream was heavily impregnated with atropine sulfate. I took a sample and had it tested.
The story is continued on the other side of the cassette.
White, shaking, Hugh asked, "Who did it? Why?" Hercule Poirot said, "That is what I have been studying ever since I arrived here. I have been looking for a motive for murder. Diana may be gained financially by your death, but I did not consider her seriously." Hugh Chandler flashed out, "I should hope not. I envisaged another possible motive, the eternal triangle, 2 men and a woman. Colonel Frobisher had been in love with your mother. Admiral Chandler married her." Admiral Chandler cried out, "George? George! I won't believe it." Hugh said in an incredulous voice, "Do you mean that hatred could go on to a son?" Hercule Poirot said, "Under certain circumstances, yes." Frobisher cried out, "It's a damned lie! Don't believe him, Charles." Chandler shrank away from him. He muttered to himself, "The datura. India, yes, I see. And we'd never suspect poison, not with madness in the family already." "Mais oui!" Hercule Poirot's voice rose high and shrill. "Madness in the family. A madman bent on revenge, cunning as madmen are, concealing his madness for years." He whirled round on Frobisher. "Mon Dieu, you must have known, you must have suspected that you was your son. Why did you never tell him so?" Frobisher stammered, gulped. "I didn't know. I couldn't be sure. You see, Caroline came to me once. She was frightened of something, in great trouble. I don't know. I never have known what it was all about. We lost our heads. Afterwards I went away at once. It was the only thing to be done. We both knew we'd got to play the game. I wondered, but I couldn't be sure. Caroline never said anything that led me to think Hugh was my son. And then when this streak of madness appeared, it settled things definitely, I thought." Poirot said, "Yes, it settled things. You could not see the way the boy has of thrusting out his face and bringing down his brows, a trick he inherited from you. But Charles Chandler saw it years ago, and learnt the truth from his wife. I think she was afraid of him. He'd begun to show her the mad streak. That was what drove her into your arms. You, whom she had always loved. Charles Chandler planned his revenge. His wife died in a boating accident. He and she were out in the boat alone, and he knows how that accident came about. Then he settled down to feed his concentrated hatred against the boy, who bore his name but who was not his son. Your Indian stories put the idea of datura poisoning into his head. Hugh should be slowly driven mad, driven to the stage where he would take his own life in despair. The bloodlust was Admiral Chandler's, not Hugh's. It was Charles Chandler who was driven to cut the throats of sheep in lonely fields. But it was Hugh Chandler who was to pay the penalty. Do you know when I suspected? When Admiral Chandler was so averse to his son seeing a doctor. For Hugh to object was natural enough, but the father... There might be treatment which would save his son. There were 100 reasons why he should seek to have a doctor's opinion. But no, a doctor must not be allowed to see Hugh Chandler in case a doctor should discover that Hugh was sane. Hugh said very quietly, "Sane. I am sane?" He took a step towards Diana. Frobisher said in a gruff voice, You're sane enough. There's no taint in our family.
Diana said, "Hugh." Admiral Chandler picked up Hugh's gun. He said,
"You're all a lot of nonsense. I think I'll go and see if I can get a rabbit."
Frobisher started forward, but the hand of Hercule Poirot restrained him. Poirot said, "You said yourself just now that it was the best way." Hugh and Diana had gone from the room. The two men, the Englishman and the Belgian, watched the last of the Chandlers cross the park and go up into the woods. Presently, they heard a shot.
Agatha Christie's The Stymphalian Birds. Read by Daniel Massey.
Harold Waring noticed them first walking up the path from the lake. He was sitting outside the hotel on the terrace. The day was fine, the lake was blue, and the sun shone. Harold was smoking a pipe and feeling that the world was a pretty good place. His political career was shaping well. An under-secretaryship at the age of 30 was something to be justly proud of. It had been reported that the Prime Minister had said to someone that young Waring would go far. Harold was, not unnaturally, elated. Life presented itself to him in rosy colours. He was young, sufficiently good-looking, in first-class condition, and quite unencumbered with romantic ties. He had decided to take a holiday in Czechoslovakia, so as to get right off the beaten track and have a real rest from everyone and everything. The hotel at Lake Stempka, though small, was comfortable and not overcrowded. The few people there were mostly foreigners. So far, the only other English people were an elderly woman, Mrs. Rice, and her married daughter, Mrs. Clayton. Harold liked them both. Elsie Clayton was pretty in a rather old-fashioned style. She made up very little, if at all, and was gentle and rather shy. Mrs. Rice was what is called a woman of character. She was tall, with a deep voice and a masterful manner, but she had a sense of humour and was good company. Her life was clearly bound up in that of her daughter. Harold had spent some pleasant hours in the company of mother and daughter, but they did not attempt to monopolize him, and relations remained friendly and unexacting between them. The other people in the hotel had not aroused Harold's notice. Usually they were hikers or members of a motor coach tour. They stayed a night or two and then went on. He had hardly noticed anyone else, until this afternoon. They came up the path from the lake very slowly, and it just happened that at the moment when Harold's attention was attracted to them, a cloud came over the sun. He shivered a little. Then he stared. Surely there was something odd about those two women. They had long, curved noses, like birds, and their faces, which were curiously alike, were quite immobile. Over their shoulders they wore loose cloaks that flapped in the wind like the wings of two big birds. Harold thought to himself, they are like birds. He added almost without volition, birds of ill omen. The women came straight up on the terrace and passed close by him. They were not young, perhaps nearer 50 than 40, and the resemblance between them was so close that they were obviously sisters. Their expression was forbidding. As they passed Harold, the eyes of both of them rested on him for a minute. It was a curious, appraising glance, almost inhuman. Harold's impression of evil grew stronger. He noticed the hand of one of the two sisters, a long, claw-like hand. Although the sun had come out, he shivered once again. He thought, horrible creatures, like birds of prey. He was distracted from these imaginings by the emergence of Mrs. Rice from the hotel. He jumped up and drew forward a chair. With a word of thanks, she sat down and, as usual, began to knit vigorously. Harold asked, "Did you see those two women who just went into the hotel?" "With cloaks on? Yes, I passed them." "Extraordinary creatures, didn't you think?" "Well, yes, perhaps they are rather odd. They only arrived yesterday, I think. Very alike. They must be twins." Harold said, "I may be fanciful, but I distinctly felt there was something evil about them." "How curious." "I must look at them more closely and see if I agree with you." She added, "Well, find out from the concierge who they are. Not English, I imagine." "Oh, no." Mrs. Rice glanced at her watch. She said, "Tea time. I wonder if you'd mind going in and ringing the bell, Mr. Waring." "Certainly, Mrs. Rice." He did so, and then as he returned to his seat he asked, "Where's your daughter this afternoon?" "Elsie? We went for a walk together, part of the way round the lake and then back through the pine woods. It really was lovely." A waiter came out and received orders for tea. Mrs. Rice went on, her needles flying vigorously. "Elsie had a letter from her husband. She mayn't come down to tea." "Her husband?" Harold was surprised. "Do you know, I always thought she was a widow." Mrs. Rice shot him a sharp glance. She said dryly, "Oh, no, Elsie isn't a widow." She added with emphasis, "Unfortunately." Harold was startled. Mrs. Rice, nodding her head grimly, said, "Drink is responsible for a lot of unhappiness, Mr. Waring." "Does he drink?" "Yes, and a good many other things as well. He's insanely jealous and has a singularly violent temper." She sighed. "It's a difficult world, Mr. Waring. I'm devoted to Elsie. She's my only child, and to see her unhappy isn't an easy thing to bear." Harold said with real emotion, "She's such a gentle creature. A little too gentle, perhaps." "You mean—" Mrs. Rice said slowly, "A happy creature is more arrogant. Elsie's gentleness comes, I think, from a sense of defeat. Life has been too much for her." Harold said with some slight hesitation, "How did she come to marry this husband of hers?" Mrs. Rice answered, "Philip Clayton was a very attractive person. He still has, great charm. He had a certain amount of money, and there was no one to advise us of his real character. I had been a widow for many years. 2 women living alone are not the best judges of a man's character." Harold said thoughtfully, "No, that's true." He felt a wave of indignation and pity sweep over him. Elsie Clayton could not be more than 25 at the most. He recalled the clear friendliness of her blue eyes, the soft droop of her mouth. He realized suddenly that his interest in her went a little beyond friendship, and she was tied to a brute. That evening, Harold joined mother and daughter after dinner. Elsie Clayton was wearing a soft, dull pink dress. Her eyelids, he noticed, were red. She had been crying. Mrs. Rice said briskly, "I've found out who your 2 harpies are, Mr. Waring. Polish ladies, a very good family, so the concierge says." Harold looked across the room to where the Polish ladies were sitting. Elsie said with interest, "Those 2 women over there, with the henna-dyed hair, they look rather horrible somehow. I don't know why." Harold said triumphantly, "That's just what I thought." Mrs. Rice said with a laugh, "I think you are both being absurd. You can't possibly tell what people are like just by looking at them." Elsie laughed. She said, "I suppose one can't. All the same, I think they're vultures." "Picking out dead men's eyes," said Harold. "Oh, don't," cried Elsie. Harold said quickly, "Sorry." Mrs. Rice said with a smile, "Anyway, they're not likely to cross our path." Elsie said, "We haven't got any guilty secrets." "Perhaps Mr. Waring has," said Mrs. Rice with a twinkle. Harold laughed, throwing his head back. He said, "Not a secret in the world. My life's an open book." And it flashed across his mind, what fools people are who leave the straight path. A clear conscience, that's all one needs in life. With that you can face the world and tell everyone who interferes with you to go to the devil. He felt suddenly very much alive, very strong, very much master of his fate. Harold Waring, like many other Englishmen, was a bad linguist. His French was halting and decidedly British in intonation. Of German and Italian he knew nothing. Up to now, these linguistic disabilities had not worried him. In most hotels on the continent he had always found everyone spoke English, so why worry? But in this out-of-the-way spot, where the native language was a form of Slovak, and even the concierge only spoke German, it was sometimes galling to Harold when one of his 2 women friends acted as interpreter for him. Mrs. Rice, who was fond of languages, could even speak a little Slovak. Harold determined that he would set about learning German. He decided to buy some textbooks and spend a couple of hours each morning in mastering the language. The morning was fine, and after writing some letters, Harold looked at his watch and saw there was still time for an hour's stroll before lunch. He went down towards the lake and then turned aside into the pine woods. He had walked there for perhaps 5 minutes when he heard an unmistakable sound. Somewhere not far away a woman was sobbing her heart out. Harold paused a minute. Then he went in the direction of the sound. The woman was Elsie Clayton, and she was sitting on a fallen tree with her face buried in her hands and her shoulders quivering with the violence of her grief. Harold hesitated a minute, then he came up to her. He said gently, "Mrs. Clayton, Elsie." She started violently and looked up at him. Harold sat down beside her. He said with real sympathy, "Is there anything I can do, anything at all?" She shook her head. No, you're very kind, but there's nothing that anyone can do for me." Harold said rather diffidently, "Is it to do with your husband?" She nodded. Then she wiped her eyes and took out her powder compact. Struggling to regain command of herself, she said in a quavering voice, "I didn't want Mother to worry. She's so upset when she sees me unhappy. So I came out here to have a good cry. It's silly, I know. Crying doesn't help, but sometimes one just feels that life is quite unbearable." Harold said, "I'm terribly sorry." She threw him a grateful glance. Then she said hurriedly, "It's my own fault, of course. I married Philip of my own free will. It's turned out badly. I've only myself to blame." Harold said, "It's very plucky of you to put it like that." Elsie shook her head. "No, I'm not plucky. I'm not brave at all. I'm an awful coward. That's partly the trouble with Philip. I'm terrified of him, absolutely terrified, when he gets in one of his rages." Harold said with feeling, "You ought to leave him." "I daren't. He wouldn't let me." "Nonsense. What about a divorce?" She shook her head slowly. "I've no grounds." She straightened her shoulders. "No, I've got to carry on. I spend a fair amount of time with Mother, you know. Philip doesn't mind that, especially when we go somewhere off the beaten track like this." She added, the colour rising in her cheeks, "You see, part of the trouble is that he's insanely jealous. If I so much as speak to another man, he makes the most frightful scenes." Harold's indignation rose. He had heard many women complain of the jealousy of her husband, and whilst professing sympathy, had been secretly of the opinion that the husband was amply justified. But Elsie Clayton was not one of those women. She had never thrown him so much as a flirtatious glance. Elsie drew away from him with a slight shiver. She glanced up at the sky. "The sun's gone in. It's quite cold. We'd better get back to the hotel. It must be nearly lunchtime." They got up and turned in the direction of the hotel. They had walked for perhaps a minute when they overtook a figure going in the same direction. They recognized her by the flapping cloak she wore. It was one of the Polish sisters. They passed her, Harold bowing slightly. She made no response, but her eyes rested on them both for a minute, and there was a certain appraising quality in the glance which made Harold feel suddenly hot. He wondered if the woman had seen him sitting by Elsie on the tree-trunk. If so, she probably thought... Well, she looked as though she thought. A wave of indignation overwhelmed him. What foul minds some women had! Odd that the sun had gone in, and that they should both have shivered, perhaps just at the moment that that woman was watching them. Suddenly Harold felt a little uneasy. That evening Harold went to his room a little after 10. The English mail had arrived, and he had received a number of letters, some of which needed immediate answers. He got into his pyjamas and a dressing-gown and sat down at the desk to deal with his correspondence. He had written 3 letters and was just starting on the 4th when the door was suddenly flung open and Elsie Clayton staggered into the room. Harold jumped up, startled. Elsie had pushed the door to behind her and was standing clutching at the chest of drawers. Her breath was coming in great gasps. Her face was the colour of chalk. She looked frightened to death. She gasped out, "It's my husband. He arrived unexpectedly. I think he'll kill me. He's mad, quite mad. I came to you. Don't let him find me." She took a step or two forward, swaying so much that she almost fell. Harold put out an arm to support her. As he did so, the door was flung open, and a man stood in the doorway. He was of medium height, with thick eyebrows and a sleek, dark head. In his hand he carried a heavy spanner. His voice rose high and shook with rage. He almost screamed the words. "So that Polish woman was right! You are carrying on with this fellow!" Elsie cried, No, Philip, it's not true. You're wrong." Harold thrust the girl swiftly behind him as Philip Clayton advanced on them both. The latter cried, "Wrong! Am I? When I find you here in his room, you she-devil, I'll kill you for this!" With a swift sideways movement, he dodged Harold's arm. Elsie, with a cry, ran round the other side of Harold, who swung round to fend the other off. But Philip Clayton had only one idea, to get at his wife. He swerved round again. Elsie, terrified, rushed out of the room. Philip Clayton dashed after her, and Harold, with not a moment's hesitation, followed him. Elsie had darted back into her own bedroom at the end of the corridor. Harold could hear the sound of the key turning in the lock, but it did not turn in time. Before the lock could catch, Philip Clayton wrenched the door open. He disappeared into the room, and Harold heard Elsie's frightened cry. In another minute, Harold burst in after them. Elsie was standing at bay against the curtains of the window. As Harold entered, Philip Clayton rushed at her, brandishing the spanner. She gave a terrified cry. Then, snatching up a heavy paperweight from the desk beside her, she flung it at him. Clayton went down like a log. Elsie screamed. Harold stopped, petrified, in the doorway. The girl fell on her knees beside her husband. He lay quite still where he had fallen. Outside in the passage, there was the sound of the bolt of one of the doors being drawn back. Elsie jumped up and ran to Harold. "Please, please!" Her voice was low and breathless. "Go back to your room. They'll come. They'll find you here." Harold nodded. He took in the situation like lightning. For the moment, Philip Clayton was hors de combat. But Elsie's scream might have been heard. If he were found in her room, it could only cause embarrassment and misunderstanding. Both for her sake and his own, there must be no scandal. As noiselessly as possible, he sprinted down the passage and back into his room. Just as he reached it, he heard the sound of an opening door. He sat in his room for nearly half an hour, waiting. He dared not go out. Sooner or later, he felt sure, Elsie would come. There was a light tap on his door. Harold jumped up to open it. It was not Elsie who came in, but her mother, and Harold was aghast at her appearance. She looked suddenly years older. Her grey hair was dishevelled, and there were deep black circles under her eyes. He sprang up and helped her to a chair. She sat down, her breath coming painfully. Harold said quickly, "You look all in, Mrs. Rice. Can I get you something?" She shook her head. "No. Never mind me. I'm all right, really. It's only the shock. Mr. Waring, a terrible thing has happened." Harold asked, "Is Clayton seriously injured?" She caught her breath. "Worse than that. He's dead." The room spun round. A feeling as of icy water trickling down his spine rendered Harold incapable of speech for a moment or two. He repeated dully, "Dead?" Mrs. Rice nodded. She said, and her voice had the flat, level tones of complete exhaustion, "The corner of that marble paperweight caught him right on the temple, and he fell back with his head on the iron fender. I don't know which it was that killed him, but he is certainly dead. I have seen death often enough to know." Disaster. That was the word that rang insistently in Harold's brain. Disaster, disaster, disaster. He said vehemently, "It was an accident. I saw it happen." Mrs. Rice said sharply, "Of course it was an accident. I know that. But is anyone else going to think so? Frankly, I'm frightened, Harold. This isn't England." Harold said slowly, "I can confirm Elsie's story." Mrs. Rice said, "Yes, and she can confirm yours. That is just it." Harold's brain, naturally a keen and cautious one, saw her point. He reviewed the whole thing and appreciated the weakness of their position. He and Elsie had spent a good deal of their time together. Then there was the fact that they had been seen together in the pine woods by one of the Polish women under rather compromising circumstances. The Polish ladies apparently spoke no English, but they might nevertheless understand it a little. The woman might have known the meaning of words like jealously and husband if she had chanced to overhear their conversation. Anyway, it was clear that it was something Elsie had said to Clayton that had aroused his jealousy, and now his death. When Clayton had died, he, Harold, had been in Elsie Clayton's room. There was nothing to show that he had not deliberately assaulted Philip Clayton with the paperweight, nothing to show that the jealous husband had not actually found them together. There was only his word and Elsie's. Would they be believed? A cold fear gripped him.
He did not imagine, no, he really did not imagine that either he or Elsie was in danger of being condemned to death for a murder they had not committed. Surely, in any case, it could be only a charge of manslaughter brought against them. Did they have manslaughter in these foreign countries? But even if they were acquitted of blame, there would have to be an inquiry. It would be reported in all the papers. An English man and woman accused, jealous husband, rising politician. Yes, it would mean the end of his political career. It would never survive a scandal like that. He said on an impulse, "Can't we get rid of the body somehow, plant it somewhere?" Mrs. Rice's astonished and scornful look made him blush. She said incisively, "My dear Harold, this isn't a detective story. To attempt a thing like that would be quite crazy." "I suppose it would," he groaned. "What can we do? My God, what can we do?" Mrs. Rice shook her head despairingly. She was frowning, her mind working painfully. Harold demanded, "Isn't there anything we can do, anything to avoid this frightful disaster?" There, it was out. Disaster. Terrible, unforeseen, utterly damning. They stared at each other. Mrs. Rice said hoarsely, "Elsie, my little girl, I'd do anything. It will kill her if she has to go through a thing like this." And she added, "You too, your career, everything." Harold managed to say, "Never mind me," but he did not really mean it. Mrs. Rice went on bitterly, "And all so unfair, so utterly untrue. It's not as though there had ever been anything between you. I know that well enough." Harold suggested, catching at a straw, "You'll be able to say that, at least, that it was all perfectly all right." Mrs. Rice said bitterly, "Yes, if they believe me. But you know what these people out here are like." Harold agreed, gloomily. To the continental mind there would undoubtedly be a guilty connection between himself and Elsie, and all Mrs. Rice's denials would be taken as a mother lying herself black in the face for her daughter. Harold said gloomily, "Yes, we're not in England, worse luck." "Ah," Mrs. Rice lifted her head, "that's true. It's not England. I wonder now if something could be done." "Yes?" Harold looked at her eagerly. Mrs. Rice said abruptly, "How much money have you got?" "Not much with me," he added. "I could wire for money, of course." Mrs. Rice said grimly, "We may need a good deal, but I think it's worth trying." Harold felt a faint lifting of despair. He said, "What is your idea?" Mrs. Rice spoke decisively. "We haven't a chance of concealing the death ourselves, but I do think there's just a chance of hushing it up, officially." "You really think so?" Harold was hopeful, but slightly incredulous. "Yes, for one thing, the manager of the hotel will be on our side. He'd much rather have the thing hushed up. It's my opinion that in these out-of-the-way, curious little Balkan countries you can bribe anyone and everyone, and the police are probably more corrupt than anyone else." Harold said slowly, "Do you know, I believe you're right." Mrs. Rice went on, "Fortunately, I don't think anyone in the hotel heard anything." "Who has the room next to Elsie's on the other side from yours?" "The two Polish ladies. They didn't hear anything. They'd have come out into the passage if they had. Philip arrived late. Nobody saw him but the night porter. Do you know, Harold, I believe it will be possible to hush the whole thing up and get Philip's death certified as due to natural causes. It's just a question of bribing high enough and finding the right man. Probably the chief of police." Harold smiled faintly. He said, "It's rather comic opera, isn't it? Well, after all, we can but try." Mrs. Rice was energy personified. First, the manager was summoned. Harold remained in his room, keeping out of it. He and Mrs. Rice had agreed that the story told had better be that of a quarrel between husband and wife. Elsie's youth and prettiness would command more sympathy. On the following morning, various police officials arrived and were shown up to Mrs. Rice's bedroom. They left at midday. Harold had wired for money, but otherwise had taken no part in the proceedings. Indeed, he would have been unable to do so, since none of these official personages spoke English. At 12 o'clock, Mrs. Rice came to his room. She looked white and tired, but the relief on her face told its own story. She said simply, "It's worked." "Thank heaven! You've really been marvellous. It seems incredible." Mrs. Rice said thoughtfully, "By the ease with which it went, you might almost think it was quite normal.
They practically held out their hands right away. It's rather disgusting, really." Harold said dryly, "This isn't the moment to quarrel with the corruption of the public services. How much?" "The tariff's rather high." She read out a list of figures. The chief of police, the commissaire, the agent, the doctor, the hotel manager, the night porter. Harold's comment was merely, "The night porter doesn't get much, does he? I suppose it's mostly a question of gold lace." Mrs. Rice explained, "The manager stipulated that the death should not have taken place in his hotel at all. The official story will be that Philip had a heart attack in the train. He went along the corridor for air, you know how they always leave those doors open, and he fell out on the line. It's wonderful what the police can do when they try." "Well," said Harold, "thank God our police force isn't like that." And in a British and superior mood, he went down to lunch. After lunch, Harold usually joined Mrs. Rice and her daughter for coffee. He decided to make no change in his usual behaviour. This was the first time he had seen Elsie since the night before. She was very pale and was obviously still suffering from shock, but she made a gallant endeavour to behave as usual, uttering small commonplaces about the weather and the scenery. They commented on a new guest who had just arrived, trying to guess his nationality. Harold thought a moustache like that must be French. Elsie said German, and Mrs. Rice thought he might be Spanish. There was no one else but themselves on the terrace, with the exception of the two Polish ladies who were sitting at the extreme end, both doing fancy work. As always when he saw them, Harold felt a queer shiver of apprehension pass over him. Those still faces, those curved beaks of noses, those long claw-like hands. A page boy approached and told Mrs. Rice she was wanted. She rose and followed him. At the entrance to the hotel they saw her encounter a police official in full uniform. Elsie caught her breath. "You don't think anything's gone wrong?" Harold reassured her quickly. "Oh, no, nothing of that kind." But he himself knew a sudden pang of fear. He said, "Your mother's been wonderful." "I know. Mother is a great fighter. She'll never sit down under defeat." Elsie shivered. "But it is all horrible, isn't it?" "Now, don't dwell on it. It's all over and done with." Elsie said in a low voice, "I can't forget that it was I who killed him." Harold said urgently, "Don't think of it that way. It was an accident. You know that, really." Her face grew a little happier. Harold added, "And anyway, it's past. The past is the past. Try never to think of it again." Mrs. Rice came back. By the expression on her face, they saw that all was well. "It gave me quite a fright," she said almost gaily, "but it was only a formality about some papers. Everything's all right, my children. We're out of the shadow. I think we might order ourselves a liqueur on the strength of it." The liqueur was ordered and came. They raised their glasses. Mrs. Rice said, "To the future." Harold smiled at Elsie and said, "To your happiness." She smiled back at him and said as she lifted her glass, "And to you, to your success. I'm sure you're going to be a very great man." With the reaction from fear, they felt gay, almost light-headed. The shadow had lifted, all was well. From the far end of the terrace, the two bird-like women rose. They rolled up their work carefully. They came across the stone flags. With little bows, they sat down by Mrs. Rice. One of them began to speak. The other one let her eyes rest on Elsie and Harold. There was a little smile on her lips. It was not, Harold thought, a nice smile. He looked over at Mrs. Rice. She was listening to the Polish woman, and though he couldn't understand a word, the expression on Mrs. Rice's face was clear enough. All the old anguish and despair came back. She listened and occasionally spoke a brief word. Presently the two sisters rose and, with stiff little bows, went into the hotel. Harold leaned forward. He said hoarsely, "What is it?" Mrs. Rice answered him in the quiet, hopeless tones of despair. "Those women are going to blackmail us. They heard everything last night, and now we've tried to hush it up. It makes the whole thing 1,000 times worse." Harold Waring was down by the lake. He had been walking feverishly for over an hour, trying by sheer physical energy to still the clamour of despair that had attacked him.
He came at last to the spot where he had first noticed the two grim women who held his life and Elsie's in their evil talons. He said aloud, "Curse them! Damn them for a pair of devilish blood-sucking harpies!" A slight cough made him spin round. He found himself facing the luxuriantly moustached stranger who had just come out from the shade of the trees. Harold found it difficult to know what to say. This little man must have almost certainly overheard what he had just said. Harold, at a loss, said somewhat ridiculously, good afternoon." In perfect English, the other replied, "But for you, I fear it is not a good afternoon." Harold was in difficulties again. The little man said, "You are, I think, in trouble, monsieur. Can I be of any assistance to you?" "Oh, no, thanks, no, thanks. Just blowing off steam, you know." The other said gently, "But I think, that I could help you. I am correct, am I not, in connecting your troubles with two ladies who were sitting on the terrace just now?" Harold stared at him. "Do you know anything about them?" He added, "Who are you, anyway?" As though confessing to royal birth, the little man said modestly, "I am Hercule Poirot. Shall we walk a little way into the wood, and you shall tell me your story? As I say, I think I can aid you." To this day, Harold is not quite certain what made him suddenly pour out the whole story to a man to whom he had only spoken a few minutes before. Perhaps it was overstrain. Anyway, it happened. He told Hercule Poirot the whole story. The latter listened in silence. Once or twice he nodded his head gravely. When Harold came to a stop, the other spoke dreamily. "The Stymphalian birds with iron beaks who feed on human flesh and who dwell by the Stymphalian lake. Yes, it accords very well." "I beg your pardon," said Harold, staring. Perhaps he thought this curious-looking little man was mad. Hercule Poirot smiled. "I reflect, that is all. I have my own way of looking at things, you understand? Now, as to this business of yours, you are very unpleasantly placed." Harold said impatiently, "I don't need you to tell me that." Hercule Poirot went on, "It is a serious business, blackmail. These harpies will force you to pay, and pay, and pay again, and if you defy them, well, what happens?" Harold said bitterly, "The whole thing comes out. My career's ruined, and a wretched girl who's never done anyone any harm will be put through hell, and God knows what the end of it all will be." "Therefore," said Hercule Poirot, "something must be done." Harold said boldly, "What?" Hercule Poirot leaned back, half closing his eyes. He said, and again a doubt of his sanity crossed Harold's mind, "It is the moment for the castanets of bronze." Harold said, "Are you quite mad?" The other shook his head. He said, "Mais non. I strive only to follow the example of my great predecessor, Hercules. Have a few hours' patience, my friend. By tomorrow I may be able to deliver you from your persecutors." Harold Waring came down the following morning to find Hercule Poirot sitting alone on the terrace. In spite of himself, Harold had been impressed by Hercule Poirot's promises. He came up to him now and asked anxiously, "Well?" Hercule Poirot beamed upon him. "It is well." "What do you mean?" "Everything has settled itself satisfactorily." "But what has happened?" Hercule Poirot replied dreamily, "I have employed the castanets of bronze, or in modern parlance I have caused metal wires to hum. In short, I have employed the telegraph. Your Stymphalian birds, monsieur, have been removed to where they will be unable to exercise their ingenuity for some time to come." "They were wanted by the police? They have been arrested?" "Precisely." Harold drew a deep breath. "How marvellous! I never thought of that." He got up. "I must find Mrs. Rice and Elsie and tell them." "They know." "Oh, good." Harold sat down again. "Tell me, just what—" He broke off. Coming up the path from the lake were two figures with flapping cloaks and profiles like birds.
He exclaimed, "I thought you said they'd been taken away." Hercule Poirot followed his glance. "Oh, those ladies, they are very harmless. Polish ladies of good family, as the porter told you. Their appearance is perhaps not very pleasing, but that is all. But I don't understand. No, you do not understand. It is the other ladies who were wanted by the police, the resourceful Mrs. Rice and the lachrymose Mrs. Cretan. It is they who are well-known birds of prey. Those two, they make their living by blackmail, mon cher." Harold had a sensation of the world spinning round him. He said faintly, "But the man who was killed. No one was killed. There was no man. But I saw him. Oh, no." "The tall, deep-voiced Mrs. Rice is a very successful male impersonator. It was she who played the part of the husband, without her grey wig and suitably made up for the part." He leaned forward and tapped the other on the knee. "You must not go through life being too credulous, my friend. The police of a country are not so easily bribed. They are probably not to be bribed at all, certainly not when it is a question of murder. These women trade on the average Englishman's ignorance of foreign languages. Because she speaks French or German, it is always this Mrs. Rice who interviews the manager and takes charge of the affair. The police arrive and go to her room, yes? But what actually passes? You do not know. Perhaps she has lost a brooch, something of that kind. Any excuse to arrange for the police to come so that you shall see them. For the rest, what actually happens? You wire for money, a lot of money, and you hand it over to Mrs. Rice, who is in charge of all the negotiations. And that is that. But they are greedy, these birds of prey. They have seen that you have taken an unreasonable aversion to these two unfortunate Polish ladies. The ladies in question come and hold a perfectly innocent conversation with Mrs. Rice, and she cannot resist repeating the game. She knows you cannot understand what is being said. So, you have to send for more money, which Mrs. Rice will pretend to distribute to a fresh set of people." Harold drew a deep breath. He said, "And Elsie? Elsie?" Hercule Poirot averted his eyes. "She played her part very well. She always does. A most accomplished little actress. Everything is very pure, very innocent. She appeals not to sex, but to chivalry." Hercule Poirot added dreamily, "That is always successful with Englishmen." Harold Waring drew a deep breath. He said crisply, "I'm going to set to work and learn every European language there is. Nobody's going to make a fool of me a second time."
Thank you for choosing a DH Audio production. Look for other DH Audio programs at your local retailer. Call toll-free at 1-800-962-5200 or visit our new interactive website with audio samples at www.dhaudio.com.